Today, we're going to tear down yet another engine I dug out of the scrap bin, which would explain why there's a few broken things on the outside of this engine. This is the GM 1.5 liter LFV. It's out of a 2020 Chevrolet Malibu. I almost said Altima because it is a domestic Altima. It's out of a 2020 Malibu with 98,000 miles on it, and it's supposed to be bad. Now, I heard the early versions of this engine in 16 and 17 had problems melting pistons from a bad tune. They are turbocharged, they're direct injected, and they're designed to run on 87 octane. I think they fixed that problem, so I am interested to see what went wrong with this engine. At 98,000 miles, it seems a little premature for engine failure, but I did get the VIN with this engine, and let's just say that the maintenance history is sparse. That doesn't mean it wasn't done, it just means it wasn't reported, or maybe not done. The LFV is a global engine, which means you can find it in all sorts of different cars in most parts of the world. But in North America, this engine is exclusive to the base model, bumper dragging, double donated, broken windshield, expired temp tag Chevrolet Malibu that passes you on the right shoulder at 120 miles an hour with no headlights on that used to be a rental car. And regular Malibus, I suppose, would have this engine too. This makes 163 horsepower and 184 foot-pounds of torque, which is pretty good for a 1.5 liter. I've never driven one, but they are usually or almost always paired with a CVT, which probably makes it a yawn-inspiring drive. The first thing I'd like to do is turn the engine over to see if it turns all the way over, see if there's anything broken inside. I feel compression. I think Uncle Rodney's sleeping, I don't hear him. I do hear some timing chain noises, but that could be because it might have an oil pressure fed chain tensioner. And right now there's no oil pressure. Outside of that, everything seems normal. The next first thing I'd like to do is remove the spark plugs to see how they look. Well, there is 1 through 4. They're all the right plug. They look kind of dingy, but look at number 3. It looks really clean and it's very wet. It smells like fuel. So that one wasn't firing for some reason. Will it be the engine's mechanical failure that caused that or something else? For posterity, let's turn this over without plugs so that we can feel... Ooh, that moved on its own. That was weird. Why does it do that with no plugs? That doesn't make any sense, does it? I know you're not supposed to turn them over backwards, but I guess maybe valve springs are doing that? Usually they just turn over and you can't feel any sort of pulses, but maybe in these you're just feeling valve springs. Interesting. Next, we're going to start dismantling the stuff that holds the turbo on. We're going to start with this, I think it's a coolant line right here. We're going to move this bracket off next. Next, we'll unbolt the oil return from the block. Now 2 coolant fittings from the side of the turbo. Take this whole line off, or just let it dangle. And the oil feed. Now this fitting caught my eye. This looks like it is crankcase ventilation because it has some weird, like a fuel line disconnect. Why would you do that? I mean, you can yeah, see? Why do you need this fitting on here? Next, we can unbolt this engine from the cylinder head because it has no exhaust manifold.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Stay where you're at.
It's got a handle on it, at least. This turbo had a lot of oil in the exhaust housing of the turbocharger, which is not where that goes. Here is the turbo itself. There's no real shaft play. I will say there's no wastegate movement that there's not supposed to be, so that's nice. Let's take a look inside the housing. Well, it's wet. I already told you that. I don't see any cracks anywhere. But that oil either came from the seals in the turbocharger or from the engine. And the fact that the exhaust port on the actual housing, the hot side, is wet of oil tells me it probably is not the turbocharger. Let's look at the compressor side. Wow. Lots of oil residue. There we go. Sorry. The compressor side has lots of oil residue. I don't see any damage to the impeller, which is good. But why is that so nasty looking? It's not normally what we see when we look inside the inlet of a turbo. Let's go ahead and get this heat shield / gasket out of the way. It's an oil swimming pool in there. Why is there so much oil in the cylinder head on the exhaust side? It looks to be more on the right side. Next, let's remove the intake manifold so we can see how the intake ports look like with 100,000 miles of GDI. That's probably the easiest intake to remove. Well, not terrible and not great. I mean, look at the buildup on the valves. I honestly expected worse. Hey, there's a leaf in here. Leave me alone. Yeah, not too terrible. They all look pretty similar. They're all wet. The next thing I'd like to remove is the high pressure fuel line. Please don't spray me. I said don't spray me. It sprayed me. And it's currently leaking fuel. About $14 worth. Ooh, lots of fuel. Next, I'm going to unbolt the fuel rail and the injectors. Hopefully they all come out in one piece, but I have my doubts. I bet there's a special tool for removing it. It's blue. What do I do here? I don't want to put too much force. Never a good idea to pry on this stuff with a lot of force. I'm just gently doing it the wrong way. Oh. I don't know what that did. That's a lot of force. Maybe I need something just a little bit bigger to get this out. Or maybe I just need to try harder. It looks like this one and this one and this one are fine. This one is unfine. Let's try really hard. Don't do this at home. This is not working the way I wanted it to. Success? Yes? Success. Sorry I doubted you, Blue. Now we can unbolt the valve cover and see what the valve train looks like. Hope I didn't miss any. Seems stuck in this area. Does this go all the way around? Or do I just need to pry on this side too? I think I need to remove the vacuum pump. Blue. Yep, gotta remove this one first. Here's our first look at some oil in here, and it's oil. All right, now we can see what this looks like. I think. Anything else we're caught on? So if this engine had, say, 200,000 miles on it, I would say this isn't really that bad. But for less than 100,000 miles on it, it's not that good. This is pretty varnished. I bet they got the maximum number of miles their maintenance minder told them they could, or maybe more, out of their oil changes, which is not something to be proud of. I don't see any major damage. There's a few grooves here in that roller, but the rest of this looks pretty all right. It's a very simple design. The chain seems pretty loose, but again, it probably has a oil pressure fed chain tensioner, and without the engine running, it's not going to have oil pressure. Now it's time to take the timing cover off, but to do that, we need the tensioner and the crank pulley. Oh, I thought it would just come right off. It doesn't come right off? Where's blue? Do I need a puller for this? I wouldn't need a puller for this, right? I think I need a puller. I think this is going to work, and if it doesn't, it should have. Why does this hate me so much? That's not going to work. I think it might be time for a new impact on Milwaukee. It might be time. Oh, it's not even this. Oh, I know why. I had it set wrong. That worked much better when it was at the right setting. Next, we've got a few 10s to tickle off. Those were abnormally tight. I think this is the final one. Let's see if we can pry this off. I don't really want to pry off the cam gear, so let's go to the turbo side of the engine. Anything to pry off of? No. Maybe. That came off pretty easily. So much varnish though. The timing system on this engine is relatively simple. This is just some RTV. All right, let's stop that. I don't see anything broken in here. The rails and guides look okay. The tensioner doesn't seem hyper extended. This all looks pretty all right in here. You see a little bit in the pan. Here's your oil pump chain. Looks like the oil pump is in the pan. So that'll be an interesting removal. But this all looks pretty decent. The first thing I'm going to do when I peel off the timing system is remove the tensioner. Hopefully I don't need safety toe for this. This seems tight. See, it's fine. It's got a thing to keep me from shooting this across the shop. They knew. Let's get this rail unbolted. Looks okay, we'll set that there. And the front rail. Okay. Well, these look like they're brand new. They look excellent. I don't even see any wear in them whatsoever. Not even like a groove, barely a groove where the timing chain rode. Yeah, these are awesome. Let's see what year these are. 19. So yeah, that checks out. These are originals to the engine. Not bad for 100,000 miles. Go ahead and get this chain off. Wow. That is a nice one. 0 carat. Next, I'm going to divert my attention to the caboose of the engine. We're going to unbolt the high pressure fuel pump and this bracket. And the high pressure fuel pump. That looks like a decent part. What, you thought I was going to throw it? Next we have this water pipe and manifold. We're just going to start zipping bolts out. Eventually stuff's going to fall off. Welcome to eventually. Now it's that time where we got to crap the cam crams off. At first glance, it doesn't look too bad. The journals aren't really too torn up. All the rockers roll very easily. There's that one that has a groove in it. Looks like a piece of debris got into that one. And go onto the exhaust side. There's nothing really too terrible. But there are two sides of every story, and the camshafts tell a slightly different one. It all looks fine until it doesn't. Look at that. There's some metal material on that cam journal. That cam lobe is very scored. So is that one. You can still see some material there. Now, I don't know where that's from, but these all look like they have wear. Could be that they were run a little dry, or it had dirty oil in it. I did not notice a very good maintenance history on the Carfax, but that doesn't mean it wasn't done. The exhaust cam, pretty grooved up there. They're not terrible. I think they'd polish out just fine, but they're not perfect. And I think we're going to see more damage as we further take this thing apart. Now it's time to crack the head bolts loose, and they are my favorite fastener, a 10mm hex head, and that's actually my least favorite fastener. Violent. It knocked all the rockers off. The rocker. This is going to give me swimmer's elbow. What's it look like under the head? I'll go ahead and pour these rockers out. I think there's problems. Oh, hey, that one's bad. So there is good news, and that is whoever replaced this engine did not do it for no reason. Because look at that. There's a bunch of debris in there, but if you look closely, that piston is melted. That is a bad engine, and this one is slightly worse because it left part of the piston at the top of the bore. It doesn't go there. Look at all those detonation pock marks. This thing was running lean and not so mean. Center two cylinders usually burn the hottest. In this case, so hot. And the cylinder head looks like it matches. All of that is aluminum. Now that would clean off, and I think this head would probably be okay. I would definitely check it to make sure it didn't need a valve job, because some of that aluminum could be on the actual valve seat, between the valve and the seat. I don't see any damage to the head per se. No idea if there's any value in it though. Let's go ahead and lift the head gasket. What, you thought it was going to be a closed deck? So the head gasket looks like there's some damage here and here between the cylinders. It looks like it had a blown head gasket too. So it could be that this thing was overheating and being pushed really hard, because it is there's definitely some scorch marks right there on the head gasket and there. And MLS gaskets don't blow, they usually breach. Now obviously you can torch through them, but in this case, I bet that head is not flat. Before we flip this thing upside down, we need to remove the coolant pump. Water pump. Oh, it falls off? It fell off. Stay. So, the question really is this why it overheated? It looks like it has combustion gases on it. That's why it looks like that. But I don't see any actual problems with this water pump. I think this is a good water pump. The last thing I'd like to do before we flip it over is remove the oil cooler and water pump thermostat housing. Now let's flip this thing upside down and see what kind of juices are inside. Oh, there's some decks. Oh no, oil. It's supposed to be drained. That's obviously not drained. It's okay, we have plenty of pig mat here. I ain't scared of a little oil on the ground. Before I go zipping bolts out, I'm going to get this oil filter off because I want to cut it open and see what the filter element looks like. I'll cut this open and we'll look at it by the end of the video. The next first thing I'd like to do is remove the lower oil pan. Now this is pretty damaged right here, and I think that's from being in the actual scrap bin. Come on, Blue.
Oh no, I'm ruining it.
Ooh, sparkles. A lot of sparkles. So it really doesn't look too bad, and then now it looks too bad. Now this is aluminum sparkles. It's not bearing matter. This is from the melted pistons. The problem with it being here is that this becomes a piston pump, and it pumps the piston through all the oil passages, or are they piston passages? Now I'm going to unbolt the rest of the oil pan, the upper oil pan. It looks like I need to undo this, which is the tightest bolt ever. Ooh, smoking. So this is for the variable oil pump or piston pump. Now we can zip some bolts out. These are tight. Still better than hex bolts like last week. Wish I could just get all the bolts out at once. Now it's time to pry the upper oil pan off. They left a few places to pry, which is nice. I always like it when manufacturers leave things to make service a little bit better. So that is nice. Silvery. Yep, more of the same, just like the lower pan. Next, we need to get the chain off the oil pump, which I suppose we could unbolt the oil pump and probably rotate it. Let's do that. That way we have less to take apart. I think this is going to work. Like a glove. Ooh, messy. This'll fix it. Oh wow, that's a strong pump. It's loud too. All right, that's enough playing around. Now I gotta figure out how to get this. You know, I probably should have taken that off when it was still on the chain. That would have been, this is off the chain. This is gonna work. It's going to work just fine. It's just perfectly fine. This might work just fine. Ha-ha! Now we're going to take the oil pump apart. Without taking that gear off, I don't know that I could have gotten this all the way apart. I still don't know if I can get it all the way apart, but we've increased our chances. Oh, we're leaking. Oh, I ruined it. That was not a very good feeling. So this is a 4L60 pump. I'm just kidding. It is a vein pump. It pumps veins. Let's get this kind of cleaned up so we can ascertain whether it's good or not. So let's take a look here. I cleaned a couple of the veins off, and I would consider that significant damage. I think these are the worst looking ones we've seen to date, and that would make sense for pumping a bunch of metal through it. Thankfully, aluminum is pretty soft, so it doesn't do a ton of damage. I think it would still make oil pressure just fine. Not a lot of damage here. Not taking the spring out. I know you guys want it. It's not going to happen. There's definitely some metal debris on this. This has definitely had aluminum from the pistons gone through it. I don't think when this thing melted down, they shut it right off. We'll remove this windage tray. A little bit of piston on there. A quick look at the crankcase. Lots of oil deposits. The good news here is I don't see any discolored rod caps. That would indicate that there was a bearing failure, extra friction and heat, and I don't see that. I just see lots of extended oil change interval. The next step is to get the rods and pistons out, and what I'm going to do is unbolt every rod cap, and then we'll push every piston out. And this is a bed plate design. It doesn't have separate main caps. It has basically two halves of the block that sandwich the crankshaft in the center. Ooh, that one almost fell out. I'm going to rotate this at a 100-degree angle or so I can push them out of their bores, and you can see them come out of the bores. There's also a bunch of oil in here that's going to need to leave. Oh, you can really see the damage there. All right, let's start pushing. Oh, we lost the shell. I may have to rotate the crank into a different position. We're going to try that now. We're just going to make sure that it's able, the big ends of the rod are able to clear the block. Lost another shell. Now for number 2. I feel like it's stuck. It does not want to come out. It's like there's something keeping it from coming out. There we go. Now for number 3. Well, that came out pretty easy. And lastly, number 4. It's just the right angle necessary. Too much. Now we're going to rotate this upside down so we can unbolt the bed plate and get the crankshaft out. Let's go ahead and get this oil pump chain. It's too small. First, let's unbolt the perimeter bolts, which are 10mm headed bolts. Next, we'll unbolt the big main cap bolts. Now let's get blue so we can pop it loose. I kind of leave you with places to do that. This corner is still. There's the bed plate, the remain seal out, and out comes the crank. Let's start with the connecting rod bearings. Cylinder 1 looks good, cylinder 2 looks bad, but what would you expect if it was blowing aluminum from the combustion chamber through the crankcase? 3 looks okay, 4 looks okay, but then let's go to the rods and pistons. So first off, all of the connecting rods appear to be in pretty good shape. However, the same can't be said for the pistons. Now I looked this one over, did not clean this one, and the oil rings are not clogged up on this piston, which could be a telling sign, but this piston appears to be in relatively all right condition. The rings were kind of stuck there. I don't see any damage there. That quickly changes when we get to cylinder 2 because we have this whole melted area. That whole section is melted. You know, normally when I get a blown up engine, I have one cool rod and piston to sell. But in this case, we have more than one because cylinder 3, all right, that's the good side. I'm teasing you guys. There's the bad side. It's very bad. I could probably drive a car through that. But notice that it burned through all of the rings. And when you rotate this around, the rings gap are all right here. The gap is nowhere else. They're all gapped right where the hole is. Look at all those detonation marks. And this is just fuel that cleaned the rest of this. You know, lost compression, so it couldn't fire, so it's cleaned by fuel. Look at all that stuck to the connecting rod. There's our hole right there. That's a whole hole. So yeah, I don't just have 2 cool rods and pistons to sell for desk ornaments. There's actually, what am I doing here? This one is melted too. This is the one that went flying, but that didn't create that much heat. It's not obviously as bad, but it is melted. And they all seem to be melted in different spots. That one's pretty much dead on with the direction of the rod. This one's off the center. This one's pretty similar. Actually, they are pretty similar, but yeah. 3 melted pistons. That is impressive. The main bearings look pretty good. I'm actually shocked that the bearings look as good as they do considering that this doesn't look like it's been that well maintained. And then we get to the crankshaft. Because the bearings all look pretty good, the crankshaft journals also mirror that and they look really nice. Not sure if this is a sellable part because some of these parts are very inexpensive new. But maybe. Before I show what the bores look like, I want to point out that we did not remove knock sensors from this. In fact, this engine did not have knock sensors. Now, they do have knock sensors, but it did not come with knock sensors, which is kind of odd. I would think that any replacement engine would have knock sensors. They go right here and right here, I believe. And they are not there. They weren't present. I didn't remove them. So let's look at the condition of the bores. So this is the best looking one. This is cylinder 1. There's really no issues. That quickly changes when you get to its neighbor because there's some aluminum transfer from a very hot piston. Deep grooves throughout the bore. This one's cooked. And this one's worse. This one's actually melted into the bore. That piston would like some of that aluminum back. And of course you can see the scorch marks across the 2 right here. They're not nearly as much damage as the actual bores have. And then cylinder 4 trying to join in the action. A little melty melt. This engine didn't stand a chance. Let's take a look at this filter. Oh, look at that silver stuff in there. It's not a lot, but it's in every pleat. along with a bunch of junk. I mean, the filter was doing its best. There's only so much it can do when there's that much aluminum suspended in the oil. Not every Malibu is beat up and driven within an inch of its life. I was only making a crude joke at the beginning of this video. However, I base my opinion on my personal experiences. This is St. Louis. I see how people drive here. I see how they take care of or not take care of their cars. And that applies to every car out there, not just Malibus. I'm sure there's lots of really clean 1.5 liter high mileage Malibus out there that have excellent maintenance history and haven't had major problems. That is not the case for this one. 100,000, less than 100,000 miles, 98,000 miles, and this one is cooked. I mean, this thing was absolutely melted down, and I think it was one of those perfect storm scenarios. I think it was a car that wasn't well taken care of. It probably burned some oil, judging by the plugs, and on top of that, 87 octane. Oil lowers octane when it's in the combustion chamber, and it also had been known that those things melted pistons in their early years. So I think they probably retuned or recalibrated them, but they probably didn't do it quite enough. The early cars melted pistons all the time. There's lots of videos of them puffing blow-by with the oil cap off and misfiring. In this case, I don't even think this one ran, and if it did, not enough to pull itself into the shop to get the engine replaced. I'm sure there was one instance that this thing let go, and I can imagine it was wide open throttle, high speed, extreme load scenario with maybe an overheating engine. That's a recipe for disaster. It's also kind of odd that the knock sensors were missing. Every used engine I've ever sold, I left the knock sensors on, so that doesn't really make sense. Either way, I don't know that I would judge all of these engines by what we saw here today, because this wasn't a prime example of a well-maintained engine that failed. This was the example of an owner, an operator that failed. That doesn't mean that they would have blown up any car that they were driving. I just think the margin of error that manufacturers are leaving on the table nowadays with the emissions and CAFE standards is so narrow that the minute something is wrong, it goes catastrophic. I have virtually no parts to sell as replacement off this. I looked up everything on this engine. There's hardly any good valuable parts. However, if you'd like a rod and piston that's melted for your desk, I've got 3 of them out of this engine, which is more than I usually do when I have a catastrophic failure on the stand. Or if you'd like to buy any parts out of the engines I've torn down in the past, or maybe you want to buy parts out of this flooded, not flooded, this was in Hurricane Helene, 350Z manual convertible. I'm going to leave our email in the video description. You can also go to Importapart.com and peruse our inventory. I've been uploading our parts cards every single week. I've bought quite a few of these flood cars so far, so you might find some videos on them as well. I really hope you enjoyed this video. As always, I love all the comments, all the feedback, and even the criticism. I love it all, and I'll catch you on the next one. This is so stupid. Now I got to get down. See, I know what I'm doing.